Jews have always been living in Israel since the beginning of time. Yet here we are in 2021 still talking about how the Palestinians are supposed to be living in Israel and having that be their mainland.
Like, I don't get why this is still a topic of conversation, but
Here we are.
But the Palestinians were not living in Israel first. Mm-hmm. The mainstream media and the government
tries to hide it.
And they've been lying to us for a generation. So once and for all, we're going to just go through a history lesson. Lay it all out.
And
let's go back to the beginning.
So, with that being said, here we go.
Welcome to Unleashed with the Patriot Sisters. Buckle up, girl, because we're about to spill that tea just like we did in 1773.
We light the fire under all things politics. And don't worry, social justice warriors, we'll light the fire underneath you too.
Why?
Because we're inclusive.
Prepare to be triggered.
There has been a single people group that has stood the test of time and time again, that has always been dispersed, persecuted, hated on, whatever you want to call it, and that is the group of the Jewish people.
From the beginning of time, the Jews have been the most consistently hated group of people throughout history, no matter what country, no matter what continent they are on. It's a reoccurring theme that the Jews are hated by Christians, by Muslims, by whoever. Governments, dictatorships, doesn't really matter. Consistently, they've been hated upon, whether that be the Holocaust, whether that be Egyptians, they were put into slavery. It's been a recurring theme. But where did it all begin?
I have an answer, and we're going to get into it right now. So, throwing time out of the window, we're going back into the past. Time traveling.
Get ready.
We're starting, and we're going to be reading this. So, for those that are watching a video, we're looking down at our notes that we've created because this is some really interesting things. So, with that being said, 1400.
Wait, I want to say one thing.
Yes.
I'm interrupting you like we usually do.
Yes.
So, we're going to be referring to the Bible a lot in this. Mostly because, one, it's the number one book we wholeheartedly believe in. But number two, it's
non-Christian historians have gone and looked at the Bible and said this is accurate historical book, an accurate historical book. So that's why we're also referring to the Bible for those that are non-religious.
One of the greatest books during that time period of Israel and in Egypt and all those the Middle East of what was really going on chronologically. It's one of the most accurate, well-rounded books. So we thought, why not go to the biggest and the best?
So 1400 BC, Joshua led the Israelites to conquer the Canaanite tribe. So it's a tribe called Canaanites, whatever. Joshua, this guy, led the Israelis to conquer it. The goal was to form a nation state. You can find a lot of this stuff. A lot of the stuff we're gonna be referring to is in 2 Kings, but right now that little tidbit about Joshua leading the Israelites, that is in Joshua, the 10th chapter, if you want to go and read it. So that's what happened in 1400 BC. Now jumping to...
That was the first recorded time of Israel becoming a group and coming together. Yeah.
Now flash forward to 733 BC.
At this time, Israel was completely under the Assyrian control. Jews were being deported. They were being made into slaves and servants for the Assyrian government. The Assyrian government was never a good thing. Okay, they were not the friendly ones. Okay, and now the Assyrian population, which if you remember, Assyria during that time is now inside of Israel.
Right.
So inside of that area.
They had control in that region.
Yeah, so the Assyrian population is growing. They're reproducing, it's becoming bigger. They're conquering people. They're becoming a thing.
Yes. But here's the thing. Assyria is growing with the people and the nations that they've conquered. Mm-hmm. So we know that Assyria conquered the northern part of Israel, and the aftermath of that was that only Judah, a region, was remaining.
And that is found in 2 Kings 17. Yeah.
So 2 Kings chapter 17. I thought you were going to say more. Okay.
No.
586 BC. We're moving through time right now.
So almost 200 and something years later.
King Nebuchadnezzar. You probably heard of that if you're a Christian or not. Yeah, so he pops
into the picture.
He
was the youngest king too. He was nasty.
Was it David?
Well, not the youngest king. I'm sorry. He was just a young king that was nasty.
So King Nebuchadnezzar, he pops back into the picture, and he captured a city in Israel, which we call Jerusalem. And he deported. Funny how that pops into culture again. Deported the Jews living there to move to a place called Babylon, which had been conquered which had Babylon had conquered the southern portion of Judah, which is the kingdom south of Israel. Basically, then a new governor erected from that, and he was murdered. So the remaining Jews fled the area because they were being persecuted, right? And they went to Egypt.
So what happens when they head that way? Well, in 1444 BC to like 1442, so like a 2-year time period,
they rebuilt the wall
of Jerusalem. So that's why you see in history the walls of Jerusalem was continually moving based upon being conquered versus not being teared down and what all that looks like. So the Jews, they returned to Jerusalem, which is their homeland. So they had been scattered like twice, I believe, so far
at this point.
They come back to their homeland, and when they came back, it was under the leadership, I'm totally going to butcher this name.
Well, should we just call him Z?
I'm going to Zerubbabel.
Zerubbabel.
I don't know.
We'll
and
call
Ezra.
him Z and Ezra.
Okay.
And the Jews really needed persecution. No, I take that back. They needed protection because they were being persecuted.
So they rebuilt the walls, like we said, and it became a sign to Israel's enemies that God was protecting them.
Yeah, it's like it was like a symbol.
Because back in the biblical days, and biblical days not meaning only referring to Bible, but like back then in that live history, walls were a sense of one, strength,
power,
and protection. You totally cut me.
Oh, did I?
Yeah.
We were just
my punchline.
You were thinking too loud.
Sorry, that wasn't even on the script.
I know.
That was just me.
I know. You were thinking too loud. So
that was found in Nehemiah 6:16. If you want to look that up.
Now, moving forward in time, we're around 330, so BC, around that time frame. Israel fell to the Greeks. This is when history you probably were taught in school.
This is where we usually pick up.
Right. So Israel fell. Okay. Now it's owned or whatever, controlled by the Greeks. And Alexander the Great, for 13 years, this dude was overthrowing the Persian Empire, which included Israel.
Right. It was a part of that group in that land.
So it's not going well for Israel.
So then a prophet of the name of Daniel actually prophesied that this would happen. When he was called in by King Nebuchadnezzar, the guy we talked about earlier, to interpret a dream the king had. So the dream the king had, Daniel came and interpreted it for him and basically said, you're going to be overthrown.
And we're seeing that happen around 333 BC.
Yes.
Now, again, ready? Time hop. Moving forward in time, 167 to 160 BC time frame.
Alexander the Great, he died.
Yeah.
How did he die? Do we know?
Don't know.
I don't remember.
And then the empire that he was in control of split into 4 regions, and those went into
his generals.
His 4 generals.
So he died. Who becomes in charge? Guess he didn't have a son. I don't know what usually goes to the son.
One of his generals took over Egypt. Another got Syria. And then there was a piece of land called Israel.
And so now we're going to highlight what happens next.
Yes.
Hopefully you guys are following along with us. This isn't our typical flow of things.
This is very systematic. So
bear with us.
Here we go. Ready? We're going to go for it. The Palestinians tolerated the Jews and their religious practices. They were not in love with it, but they tolerated it. However, the land was eventually conquered once again by another empire, and the new government that came in and started controlling the land started to persecute the Jews. Now, they did this by outlawing the religious practices. They made them worship
the Greek gods like Zeus. Remember having to study Zeus in school? And the Greek gods. In school, my mom would actually get me out. My whole 7th grade curriculum was on this, my reading class. And my mom actually got me out of reading all of that. But so then I got an alternate assignment that was horribly hard. But anyway, so we've never been
fans
into
of
that mythology.
Gods. I'm more into the real God.
I prefer to be on the winning team if we're just going by winning
team. Anyways, so that's currently what's happening.
So they tolerated the Jews and their people, but they also persecuted them by outlawing their religion and forcing them to worship their God, which was not very tolerating, but we'll leave that beside the point. Yeah. So a man named Matthias, is that right?
I don't know.
Matthias?
Ooh, I think that's it. Matthias. He started a rebellion. So homeboy's on our side. He started a rebellion by preventing Jews from, like sacrificing to pagan gods, and he did a bunch of other stuff.
Killed an officer.
He and his family,
of the king.
Yeah, he and his family, they're like screwed. We're leaving. They fled to the hills to get out because they were being persecuted.
They were running again. So they did this.
They even did what's that warfare?
Guerrilla
warfare. They did that too.
On everyone who stayed in the city and kept worshiping the Greek gods, including Jews who began to embrace the Greek god Zeus and were worshiping him. So basically we have, we're going to call him a patriot. A patriot rose up, did what he needed to do, fled, and then held...
He rose up, stood tall,
and
then he fought back. He fought back with truth.
He physically fought back, which isn't my mojo.
To each their own.
But yeah, okay.
I guess. Within the right time.
Right. Time passed, and then Maccabees.
I got you.
He began to go into Rome because Rome was rising as an empire, and it's the Rome as we know it. And he went to them to help them reclaim
all Jewish territory.
He was like, I love this guy. Maccabees. Whatever.
I don't know.
You know what? All their names.
We're Sarah and Matt and Mac.
We're Sarah and Ruth. Where all the guys' names have to be complicated.
This dude was eventually found to be successful, and he also found peace with certain people of power who were evil, and they eventually, like the people who were in power died. The evil people, they died, and then Israel had absolute complete peace from what?
The 63 BC.
So a long time.
Right?
They're peaceful. They're having a great life. It's fantastic. It's a normal country.
So, but then after Rome helped them, Rome then conquered them.
And then Caesar pops into the picture.
King Caesar of Rome led King Herod's reign in Judah. So
Caesar's taking control, and but then King Herod comes into the picture, has now reigned in a region called Judah, inside of Israel.
And if you have read anything about the Bible, you know King Herod is the one who was ruling when Jesus was crucified.
To give you a time frame of what we're talking about here.
So that's about where we are in the reign of things. So again, the Jews were not living in a whole bunch of freedom during that time.
And then Rome destroyed Jerusalem. There was a civil war after Rome took over Judah, and the Jewish people fled to Jerusalem. Titus, you may or may not have heard his name before. He kind of pops in the picture again.
And he sent Roman soldiers to go against Jerusalem until the city collapsed and the temple was destroyed.
Yes.
And this is something that Jesus actually foreshadowed before he passed.
Which you can read about in Matthew 24 in the Bible.
And Matthew 26?
Yes.
Matthew 20. Yeah.
Just read that whole
around that area.
Chapters.
Okay, so this was around 40 years or so after Jesus was crucified and resurrected.
Gotta add that. The Jews eventually rebelled against Rome, and the temple was destroyed, and the Jews were slaughtered.
So the temple...
It was nasty. It was not good what was happening.
Yeah, King David's temple was destroyed.
And then another 40 years later, after that happened, a lot of rebellion taking place. That happened
again. He says that's such a bad thing.
Among the Jewish exiles, and they were eventually crushed by the Roman military, because we all know the Roman Empire was gigantic, powerful, and very
dictator-like.
Yes.
So years went back and forth. The Jews were being persecuted, pressured, and then
to conform.
They would win a little bit, but then they would be conquered by a bigger kingdom.
And here's where we jump forward in time and go to the 1900s, like normal time frame, Titanic time frame. Okay, that's what we're talking about here.
When did the Titanic sink?
1912.
So we're 2 years post Titanic.
1914. What happened?
All right, the Ottoman Empire broke up. So basically, that's
gone.
The empire names, like you'll hear the Roman Empire, the Ottoman, the Assyrian Empire, people were always conquering one another. They were taking control. It was very common in the Middle East. A lot of turmoil happened for a long time.
4 years after the Ottoman Empire broke up, Britain took control of the Middle East, and this is where what we're currently seeing manifest kind of was birthed out of. So flash forward.
So you're telling me we've been dealing with this crap for over 100 years?
It's those darn Brits. Darn it.
Blame it on the Brits. They mess everything up.
Flash forward to 1936, and the Palestinians rebelled against the British and their Jewish neighbors. So there's more rebellion happening. Then something called
the Peel Commission came forth and was formed by Britain to figure out what was causing the rebellion. So they had acquired this new land, and they were like, hold up, what did we just become in control of? What are we going to do about it?
Because the Israelis and the Palestinians want the same piece of land called Israel.
Right. It was, yes.
So they concluded the best way to fix this was to create 2 independent states, one for Jews, one for Palestinians.
But the only issue with that is that Britain offered Palestine 80% of the territory.
And the Jews were given
20%.
So
favoritism, teacher's pet.
But here's the thing. The Jews accepted the offer. The Palestinians rejected it so they could continue their rebellion. Now, hopping forward in time, 1947. Britain went to the UN to find a new solution.
And the UN voted to create 2 separate states.
Like the original plan.
One for one for the other. But again, the Jews accepted the plan because the Jewish people have they're
really easygoing people, I feel like. They're just trying to
maybe they might be a little dumb and not... But they didn't have the resources. When did Israel become a country?
1948.
48.
Okay. 47. I think it's 48.
So around this time, they were becoming
a complete nation.
In what we know is the 20th and 21st century, moving into that eventually. And they didn't have necessarily the resources. So they kind of just took with what they had. And then a war began. Okay? It was started by the Arabs against Israel, Jordan, Syria.
Egypt, Lebanon, Iraq joined them to fight. And then they lost. Israel won. The Jews won and went on with the land that they were occupying because they won the war. But then stupidity came back into the picture is probably the best way of how to put it. So we're here at 1948. We have the Israeli war that happens, East Jerusalem, which is in came under Jordanian. We kind of did like an IGTV video on this, but we're going to go back through it again. So East Jerusalem, which was under control of Jordanian control.
Exiled the Jews and or they fled. A couple years later, the Palestinian refugees struck a deal with the Jordanian government.
They would forfeit their rights to refugees assistance in order to
get ownership of land. So they basically said...
stay.
The Jordanian government said, hey, you 2 people, Palestinians, if you give up your refugee status, we will give you land in this area. And they said, great, except that land, that transfer, that legal process never actually occurred. They never actually gained legal control.
Which is how things got really messy on a legal perspective.
And then about 10, 11 years later, a 6-day war began where the Jewish people regained control of that land that was originally theirs back in, I don't even know what year we started, but I
don't know.
Back in the day. They regained control of that area, and then they looked to the Palestinian people and said, okay, so this was never really made legal. This isn't really technically your land. But what we'll do is if you're willing to pay rent
for your place where you live,
you can stay.
Well, I think it was 4 families that ended up staying. They chose not to pay rent for decades.
About 50 years.
How does that happen and nobody does anything? I don't know. I don't care, but it happened.
I mean, you miss rent for a month here in the States
and
you got an eviction notice.
Dead. So flash forward all those decades later, and here we are doing something about it. And that's what we're currently seeing in Israel.
Exactly.
The fire between Hamas, Palestinians, and Israel.
But why did this become such a big deal all of a sudden? Why, you ask? Well, it's because the Israeli Supreme Court system essentially came and was brought to the Supreme Court and said, hey, we're ruling they have to get out. They haven't paid their rent in about 50 years
and
or so.
And it's time to go.
So you got to go. Pack up and leave.
And
they're not even kicking them out of Israel. Or forcing them back to Palestine, which they know nothing about, really. They're just saying, hey, this specific property, you can't live here. You can go live somewhere else in the neighborhood.
So they have every right to do such a thing. But, of course, people throw things out of proportion, and they've got to throw in, politics, woe is me, and all this and that. So, but here's what you need to take away from this podcast episode. The Jewish people first went to Israel to create it to be a nation state for their people. Now, that doesn't mean a Palestine can never move into Israel. That's not what we're saying. But the control, the hierarchy, is and does belong to the Jewish people.
Right now, that's Israel's land. And so if the Palestinian, Hamas, Islamic, Muslim regime wants to go to war over this piece of land, they can do that. But Israel has the right to defend themselves. It's no different than we have Macaroon guy up in Canada coming over and being like, I want Michigan, or give me half the lake of Lake Michigan.
We'd be like, you're ridiculous.
We're going to fight you.
Go home.
Like, this is our land.
That's exactly what is happening.
So there should not be any reason for people to get all their panties in a little wad.
Yeah.
For the fact that Israel is defending themselves. It's about time we start, defending our borders.
Building walls.
Keeping people who are illegal out.
Standing for truth even when it feels like you shouldn't be, because MSM is going crazy and they're spreading so many lies. You still need to stand tall regardless of all that's happening. And that's why we will 110% always support Israel. Always.
Always, always, always. And the Bible says you'll be blessed if you do so. Anyways, we hope that went into enough detail for you. I mean, we broke
it all down.
So if
we got groovy with it, we did it all. It should have felt like a history lesson. Very detailed. But nevertheless, history lesson.
We hope you took notes when you went through this. Write it down. If you like more stuff like this, let us know on our Instagram at the Patriot Sisters or Unleashed.podcast, and we will get to it.
Send us a little DM. We read them all, just so you know.
And
all of them.
And comments. Those are great. That's probably the better way to get a hold of us sometimes.
Probably.
DMs they don't sort it accurately.
So actually do this. Comment on our most recent post and then tag us. That way we can see it.
Yes. You guys are amazing. Don't forget to always
rise up,
stand tall,
and fight back with truth. Of course, we'll see you in the next one.